Let me ask you a question. What would happen if somebody actually found a way to power a car using water? Not gasoline, not diesel, not batteries, water. Just normal water, the most common substance on Earth. Because if that were real, it wouldn't just be a cool invention, it would be one of the most disruptive discoveries in history. It would threaten oil companies, gas stations, automotive supply chains, global energy politics, entire economies built on fuel scarcity. It would turn the most powerful industry on Earth into a relic. And that's why stories like this never feel like simple science stories. They feel like thrillers. Because when you mess with energy, you mess with power. This is the story of Stanley Meyer, a man who claimed he built a water fuel cell, a man who claimed his invention could split water in a revolutionary way and use it to run an engine. And then he died suddenly, right when investors entered the picture, right when the story started getting bigger than his garage. Now, to be clear, this story has two versions. One version says he was a fraud. The other version says he was too close to the truth. And the reason we're here today is because decades later, we still can't agree on which version is real. Stanley Meyer wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a Silicon Valley CEO with a PR team and investors lined up. He was an inventor, the kind of guy America produces constantly. People who believe if you work hard enough, think long enough, and tinker long enough, you can build something that changes everything. He operated in that classic garage inventor space, a place where some people build miracles and others build scams, and sometimes it's hard to tell which is which. According to the story, Meyer claimed he had designed something called a water fuel cell. He believed he could break water down into usable gases, feed those gases into an engine, and drastically reduce or even eliminate gasoline use. If you've ever seen the phrase, a car that runs on water, this is one of the stories that helped popularize it. Now, right away, engineers and scientists will tell you something. Water isn't fuel. Water is already burned. It's the ash of hydrogen in a way. If you're going to extract energy from water, you have to split it into hydrogen and oxygen, and splitting it takes energy. So why would anybody believe this? Because Meyer didn't claim the impossible in a simple way. He claimed something much more specific. He claimed he could split water using an unusual electrical process, more efficiently than conventional methods. That difference matters, because when you say, my car runs on water, you get laughed at. But when you say, I have a new way to extract usable fuel from water efficiently, you get investors and attention, and in some cases, you get enemies. Before we go further, we have to clear something up, because the story gets messy fast. Stanley Meyer did not claim that water itself magically produced energy. His story, as it's often told, goes like this. He created a device that could apply a unique electrical process to water, breaking it down into hydrogen and oxygen more efficiently than normal electrolysis. Then he could feed that gas into an engine. Now, if you're hearing that and thinking, wait, isn't that just electrolysis? Yes, electrolysis has existed for quite a long time. It's not mysterious. You can do it at home. You put electrodes in water, run electricity through it, and you get gas bubbles. So Meyer's claim wasn't, I discovered electrolysis. His claim was, I discovered a more efficient way to do it. He talked about voltage effects, resonant frequencies, unique electrical circuits, dissociating water molecules in a special way. To the average viewer, this sounds like advanced science. To scientists, it sounds suspicious. Because the moment someone starts using words like resonance and frequency to explain why the laws of energy don't apply, people get uncomfortable. But here's why the story doesn't die. Because there were demonstrations. At least demonstrations were reported. There were videos, there were people who claim they saw it. And that's where this becomes difficult, because now we're not debating science in a classroom, we're debating human testimony. And human testimony is messy. People misinterpret things, people get tricked, people exaggerate, but also sometimes people see something real and don't have the language to explain it. And Stanley Meyer's story sits right in that uncomfortable middle. Here's the reason this story spreads like a virus. It hits something deep in the human brain. It's not just a tech breakthrough story, it's a fantasy of liberation. Because energy is one of the few things that touches every part of your life. You can survive without luxury, but you can't survive without energy. Energy controls transportation, food supply chains, heating and cooling, industry, war, national security, and money itself. So when someone claims they found free energy or water, fuel, people don't hear it as engineering, they hear it as escape. They hear it as maybe we've been trapped. And if you already believe industries suppress competition, this story becomes irresistible because the villain is built in. Oil companies, governments, the system. It's the perfect conspiracy story because it doesn't require a new villain. The villain is already there. All you need is a martyr, and that's what Stanley Meyer became. As the story goes, Meyer pursued patents and public demonstrations. Now, quick clarification, having a patent doesn't mean your invention works, it means you filed a document describing a concept. But in public perception, patents equal legitimacy. So patents and diagrams added credibility. Then the story gained attention in alternative energy circles. You start seeing that pattern. The mainstream ignores it, niche audiences amplify it, believers form communities around it, skeptics call it impossible, and the gap between them becomes a war. And once a story becomes a war, truth becomes secondary, because now it's identity. People aren't just defending facts, they're defending their worldview. And this is the point where Stanley Meyer stops being a person and becomes a symbol. To believers, a revolutionary. To skeptics, a scam. To everyone else, a mystery. Now we have to deal with the biggest issue. The thing you can't escape. If Stanley Meyer's device produced more energy than it consumed, then it would violate basic physics principles like conservation of energy. And here's where the conspiracy content gets sloppy, because people often misunderstand what scientists mean. Scientists are not saying innovation is impossible, they're saying energy has rules. If you split water into hydrogen and oxygen, you have to put energy in. When you burn hydrogen, you get energy out. Theoretically, you get back what you put in minus inefficiencies. So the claim of run a car on water becomes suspicious because where is the energy coming from? If the system is powered by electricity to split the water, the electricity is the fuel, not the water, which means you didn't replace energy, you just relocated it. Now, the believers respond with resonance claims, over unity claims, tapping into ambient energy claims, and that's where scientists usually stop listening. Because once you start talking about free energy, you're in a category of invention that has been claimed thousands of times and verified almost never. So right there, the story splits. Two versions. Well, really three. Version A, Stanley Meyer had something but didn't understand it fully. Version B, he understood it and the world stopped him. Version C, he didn't have it at all and used technical language to hide that. And to be real with you, version C is the one science leans toward. But science isn't the only force in the story, because then comes the legal trouble. At some point, Stanley Meyer faced accusations that his invention didn't do what it claimed. In some retellings, the key moment is a court finding related to fraud allegations. Now, the details are often debated online, so I'll say this carefully. There are reports that a court concluded Meyer's claims were not supported as presented. And if that's true, that's devastating to the revolutionary inventor narrative. Because now it's not just skeptics on the internet calling him fake, now it's legal consequences. Now it's institutional rejection, but Here's where conspiracy thinking grows stronger, not weaker, because believers don't interpret legal rejection as case closed. They interpret it as the system protects itself. And if you already believe the system suppresses threats, then court trouble becomes evidence of suppression, not evidence of wrongdoing. This is why conspiracy stories are so hard to kill. They're self-sealing. Any attempt to disprove the claim becomes part of the conspiracy, and then the story takes its darkest turn because soon after, Stanley Meyer died. This is the part that locks people in forever, because everything before this can be debated. The science, the patents, the demos, the skeptics, the lawsuits, all of that can be argued. But this moment doesn't feel like an argument, it feels like a scene from a movie, because according to widely repeated accounts, Stanley Meyer wasn't sitting at home alone when the story ended. He wasn't quietly fading away, he was in motion. He was meeting with people who had money, people who had influence, people who wanted answers, because at some point the conversation shifts from, is this interesting, to, can this change the world? And the second you reach that stage, your invention stops becoming a curiosity and it becomes a threat. Now, depending on which version of the story you hear, Meyer was meeting with investors, sometimes described as foreign investors, and if you listen to the way people tell it, there's an implied tension in the room. Not the tension of casual business, the tension of something high stakes. Like Meyer was either about to secure funding that would finally prove everyone wrong, or about to realize he was in a room with people who didn't take no lightly. Because when you're claiming you can disrupt global energy, you're not pitching a product, you're pitching an earthquake, and earthquakes attract attention. Not just the kind you want. Now here's where the story turns, because after that meeting, according to many accounts, Meyer went out to eat. Some versions say it was a restaurant, some say it was shortly after leaving the meeting, but the core detail stays consistent. Something happened fast. He didn't slowly get sick over days, he didn't feel a little off, he became violently ill. Suddenly, like a switch flipped. Witnesses reportedly described him collapsing. Some accounts say he ran outside struggling, and then comes the line that freezes the story in place, the line that turns a rumor into a legend. According to accounts repeated over and over again, Stanley Meyer allegedly said, "They poisoned me." Now, I want to be careful here because that sentence has been repeated so many times online that it's become larger than the evidence behind it, but that's exactly the point. Whether the words were said exactly like that or not, the fact that this is what the world remembers tells you what the story became in that moment. It became an assassination story. It became a warning story, because once that line enters the narrative, everything changes. Now, his death isn't just tragic, it's suspicious. Now, people aren't asking whether he was wrong, they're asking who was in the room. Who did he meet with? What did he show them? What did he say? What did they say back, and why did he die immediately after that? Because even if you don't believe in conspiracies, you know how humans work. When someone dies in the middle of a high-stakes claim, the timing becomes the evidence. And timing is the one thing you can't easily argue away. That's why Stanley Meyer didn't fade into history, he turned into mythology. Because the moment he died, the invention stopped being about science and became about power. And whether or not the invention ever truly worked, that part is practically irrelevant now, because the story tells you something darker, that the world doesn't just reject impossible ideas. Sometimes it buries them, and it buries the people who won't stop digging. Here's why people refuse to let this go. Because the story hits all the conspiracy pressure points. Alternative energy invention, investor meeting, sudden death, alleged last words about poisoning, a world full of industries with motive. It feels too perfect. And when a story feels too perfect, your brain reads it as a pattern. But we need to be careful here, because the feeling of a pattern is not proof of a pattern. Human brains see intention everywhere. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're just scared. However, Even if there was no conspiracy, the conditions are still disturbing because even the normal explanation is grim. It means someone can dedicate their life to a breakthrough, become consumed by it, and still end up remembered as a fraud. That's tragic in its own way, which is why the theories explode. Theory 1, he was a scammer. Let's start with the most grounded possibility. He didn't have a breakthrough, he had a story. He used patents, jargon, and demos to convince people, and eventually reality caught up. In this theory, the entire water car narrative is just another chapter in the long history of impossible inventions. This is the skeptical worldview. It's clean, it's simple, and it's the one most scientists would accept, but it doesn't satisfy emotionally because it feels like a boring ending to a story that feels too cinematic. Theory 2, he believed it, but he was wrong. This is the tragic inventor theory. He wasn't lying, he wasn't evil, he was simply mistaken. He saw something in his process, misunderstood what was happening, and became convinced he was on the verge of changing the world. This happens more than people realize. Humans become attached to their discoveries. They interpret anomalies as breakthroughs. They ignore contradictory evidence, not because they're evil, but because they're invested. In this theory, the invention didn't work as claimed, but the belief was real, and that belief destroyed his life. Theory 3, he had something, but it wasn't free energy. This is the partial truth theory. Maybe Meyer had a system that improved efficiency in some way, maybe it reduced fuel usage, maybe it did something real but not magical. A car that runs on water, this is how myths are born. A small truth gets stretched until it becomes a legend, and then the legend becomes impossible to prove because it never existed in the first place. Theory 4, suppression. And this is the theory that keeps the story alive forever. The idea that he had something real and powerful interests shut it down. People point to motives. If you introduce a technology that dramatically reduces fuel demand, you threaten trillions of dollars. You threaten national security frameworks. You threaten geopolitical leverage. Oil isn't just money, oil is control. And if you mess with control, control pushes back. This is the theory where Stanley Meyer becomes a martyr, not because it's proven, but because it fits the world people already believe they live in. A world where profit matters more than truth, industries crush threats, and innovation is only allowed if it's profitable to the right people. Theory 5, removal. This is the darkest one. Not suppression through lawsuits, not suppression through ridicule, actual removal. Poisoning, silencing. And the reason this theory is so powerful is because it doesn't require the invention to be real. It only requires someone to believe the invention could be real. Because in the world of power, sometimes the threat isn't the product. It's the possibility that a garage inventor could disrupt an industry, the wrong people could get access, and a narrative of free energy exists could spread. Even if the invention didn't work, the myth could still be dangerous, and that's why this story feels like it lives in a shadow. Now we have to come back to Earth, because no matter how cinematic the story feels, physics is not impressed by drama. Here's what science says, plain. Water is not a fuel source. To get energy out of water, you must first put energy in to split it. If your system uses electricity to split water, then the electricity is the energy source, not the water. So the idea of a self-contained car that powers itself using water alone, it just doesn't add up. And this is why engineers roll their eyes at water car stories, because they've seen it 1,000 times. But here's what keeps the story alive. Most people aren't trying to build the engine. They're trying to answer a different question. The question that isn't technical. It's psychological. The real question is, would the world allow a breakthrough like that to exist? And that's why no debunk ever fully ends this story. Because even if the invention was possible, the system that benefits from energy scarcity is real. That part isn't a theory, that part is history. So what do we do with Stanley Meyer? Was he a fraud? Was he mistaken? Was he onto something? Was he suppressed? We may never know, because the truth isn't just about the invention, it's about evidence. And evidence disappears in stories like this. It disappears into time, rumor, biased retellings, and people who profit from confusion. The Stanley Meyer story survives because it contains something humanity wants to believe: that the world could be different, that the energy problem could be solved, that one person could change everything. But it also contains something humanity fears: that if someone did solve it, they wouldn't be celebrated. They'd be erased. So maybe the invention didn't work. Maybe it did. Either way, the unsettling part is what comes after, because the story teaches you a rule about reality. Big changes don't happen just because they're possible. They happen because they're allowed. And if they're not allowed, you'll never hear about them. Or you'll hear about them as a cautionary tale, as a conspiracy, as a rumor, as a dead inventor you can't prove was right. And if you're watching this thinking there's no way this could be real, that might be true. But if you're watching this thinking there's no way they'd allow it, that might be true too. And that's why this story never dies. Not because we know what happened, but because we don't. And in the space where answers should be, something else grows: suspicion, doubt, and the feeling that the world you live in is engineered to stay exactly the way it is. Thank you for watching another deep dive from around the way. Like, comment, subscribe, let us know what crazy topic you want us to cover next. Have a good one.